When you have those high rates of vaccination, that adds protection. It allows us to live life more freely and gives us confidence to move forward, because every state in the nation is going to have to confront having Delta part of our lives moving forward.
Tonight, breaking news, a new month almost here, but that also means at least 30 more days of lockdown for Greater Sydney. COVID cases now beating national records as New South Wales officially passes Victoria in the most amount of positive infections recorded since the pandemic began. It's Sunday, the 29th of August. You're watching 6 News also tonight.
We will not forgive. We will not forget. We will hunt you down and make you pay.
The death toll rises in Kabul following a suicide bombing attack claimed by ISIS. US President Joe Biden now facing calls to resign or be impeached as concern grows for the Afghan people. And the New Liberals no more. The self-described socially progressive party forced to change their name on the ballot after a new bill passed with the support of both the government and the opposition. We'll ask the tough questions to the party's founder Victor Kline live in just a few minutes. Good evening, everyone. We are just a few days away from a brand new month, which also means we're around 3/4 done with 2021 already. Can you believe it? For many, though, it feels like just like 2020 rather, as the COVID-19 situation in New South Wales continues to escalate. Greater Sydney will be in lockdown for at least another 30 days, while regional parts of the state will stay under restrictions for almost another fortnight. It comes after New South Wales not only beat the national record of daily case numbers, but also surpassed Victoria in the total amount of infections reported since the pandemic began. Reporter Darby Travers begins our special coverage.
New South Wales has recorded 1,218 new locally acquired COVID-19 cases in the 14 hours until 8 p.m. last night, the second day in a row they've set a new national record. Authorities have confirmed 813 people are now in hospital, including 126 in ICU and 54 on a ventilator. 6 people have also died, aged in their 70s and 80s, all of which were in hospital. The state has now vaccinated 35% of their population, half of what's needed for the next major easing of restrictions despite the high case numbers, with the Premier saying they may never get to 0 cases.
What is really important for us, what is the measure of how well we're doing, is keeping people out of hospital and stopping people dying, and that is the most important measure. But what is also really important is when you have those high rates of vaccination, that adds protection. It allows us to live life more freely and gives us confidence to move forward, because every state in the nation is going to have to confront having Delta part of our lives moving forward.
When asked about an increase in child self-harm, which has reportedly risen by 30% in recent times, Premier Gladys Berejiklian said she was especially concerned about families in Western and Southwestern Sydney due to the strict lockdown measures in place. Of course, if you or anyone you know needs help, you can contact Lifeline on 13 11 14.
Now, just following on with that, New South Wales Health has announced that they will no longer be announcing the amount of linked or unlinked cases during their 11 a.m. morning update. In a statement, they've said that with current case volumes, this data is not a meaningful representation of case investigations, and it will instead be released as part of a weekly wrap-up. While will be reported alongside daily case numbers and deaths, instead are hospitalisation and ICU numbers, as well as the vaccination numbers for the past 24 hours. It sparked mixed reaction on social media, with some saying it proves they have lost control of the outbreak, while others say it's a step forward. Make sure you let us know your thoughts by commenting or tweeting using hashtag 6newsau, and you can also email us at contact@6newsau.com. And that of Victoria, where Melbourne's west is at the centre of the state's latest outbreak and 6th lockdown. While the case numbers are much lower in comparison to New South Wales, the concern is surrounding a number of cases not linked or in isolation throughout their infectious period. Coles have also announced that they have sent 2 semi-trailers full of groceries from Melbourne to Shepparton, where cases are still rising, donating 46 pallets of chilled and ambient products, including butter, milk, eggs, meat, fruit, vegetables and grocery essentials. In addition to that, the supermarket has also increased its capacity to deliver online orders to homes in Shepparton by 250%. Well, if you're watching tonight, we thank you very much for tuning in, especially if you're not in Australia. We know I've got a decent-sized audience in the US too, but right now that's where a lot of misleading claims about the situation here are spreading, from claims there is a national lockdown, there's not, to false reports that an unvaccinated Year 12 student had died as a result of the jab. What may surprise you, though, is that many of the claims aren't just being seen on social media, they're also being broadcast to millions on cable TV. Reporter Lincoln Holmes has this special report.
Right now, Victoria, New South Wales and the ACT are in lockdown. But if you're not in Australia, you may think the entire country is under restrictions.
Every state in the nation is going to have to confront having Delta part of our lives moving forward.
Misinformation about our COVID-19 information has spread online and on TV. So to understand what's going on, we have to return to the basics. Australia has 6 states and 2 territories: Queensland, New South Wales, the Australian Capital Territory, Victoria, Tasmania, South Australia, Western Australia, and the Northern Territory. All of them have had at least 2 lockdowns, except for Tasmania, where people have been living a completely normal life. Sort out all those misleading claims. Let's start with Fox News host Tucker Carlson.
In Australia, the government has implemented total lockdowns nationwide and then imposed martial law to enforce those lockdowns.
Firstly, saying that the government implemented it is wrong. All lockdowns currently in place were made by premiers and chief ministers who lead different states and territories, not the federal government, which is run by the Prime Minister. And secondly, Australia is not in a nationwide lockdown. That's totally false. But Carlson isn't the only right-wing cable news host talking about it. One American News and Newsmax have also been covering it, but not highlighting the fact that a large part of the country is out of lockdown.
Coming to an American city near you, folks, soon, if we don't put a stop to this crap.
Social media has also seen a lot of false claims as well. Last week, rumours spread here at home that a Year 12 student had died as a result of the COVID-19 vaccine. The truth was, he wasn't even vaccinated. This Facebook post from early August was shared across the world, but when you look a little closer, you can see some things aren't true. There is no Stage 5 lockdown in Sydney, and there never has been. There are more reasons to leave home than food and exercise, including essential care, work, getting tested, and getting vaccinated. On YouTube, headlines like Australia lockdown can also lead to confusion, even though we've seen similar false claims made by news outlets last year.
Don't believe what you're seeing in the social media. Don't believe what's on some of these sites.
Australia has now seen its biggest day of COVID-19 cases nationally. New South Wales passed 1,000, which also means that they have now recorded more total cases than Victoria. Lincoln Holmes, 6 News.
And as always, we strongly encourage you to speak to us if you see something you want fact-checked. You can tag or DM us on social media at 6newsau, or you can also email us, contact@6newsau.com. We've also got a fact-checking playlist right here on YouTube. Make sure you're subscribed with full notifications to check that out right now. Well, do voters prefer how Labor premiers have been handling the pandemic compared to Liberals? That may be the case, according to a new poll from the Sydney Morning Herald and The Age, which shows that Victorian Premier Dan Andrews is supported by 52% of voters nationwide, closely followed by Queensland Premier Anastasia Palaszczuk at 51%, compared to New South Wales Premier Gladys Berejiklian at just 26%. The poll shows concern nationwide that her restrictions were too light, while others say they are enough but should have come sooner. Now, when you take out people from all other states, 37% of people in New South Wales say she's done badly or very badly, while 44% say she's done well or very well. 38% of national respondents said the same about the Prime Minister, Scott Morrison. The Australian Communications and Media Authority says they are aware of reports that thousands of people are getting a text message from the United Australia Party, but they may not actually break any rules. The text, which reads, "You can never trust the Liberals, Labor or the Greens again," has been sent nationwide in the space of just 48 hours after controversial former LNP and independent MP Craig Kelly was announced as the party's new leader. The ACMA says text messages from political parties are exempt from most telecommunications communications and spam rules, adding calls, emails or SMS messages that are not commercial are generally allowed, like ones about political matters. Moving away from the pandemic now, even though New South Wales remains in lockdown as it deals with the evolving COVID situation, the threat of terrorism is continuing and becoming increasingly diverse. New South Wales Police have built a purpose facility to train specialist officers across a wide range of tactics and includes multi-storey structures for hostage rescue scenarios, static helicopter mock-ups and space to conduct classroom-style learning.
This training facility gives us skills for interoperability between our Tactical Operations Unit, our Public Order and Riot Squad, our Rescue and Bomb Disposal Unit and our police negotiators to practice their skills in a standalone environment.
Police say they maintain prepared for potential terrorism events and have implemented significant strategies to address the diversifying threat, including introduction of counter-drone capability, covert online capability to address the spread of extremist messaging, and the establishment of a hate crimes unit to identify people at risk of radicalisation.
This $3 million investment into training capabilities for the New South Wales Police is an unfortunate necessity. It's certainly a capability that will ensure our police remain the best prepared, and unfortunately it will be a reminder for those that want to do us harm that we will be prepared.
Now, on the subject of terrorism, the fallout from the terrorist attack at Kabul airport on Friday is right now continuing, with the death toll confirmed to be well over 100. Anxious to leave, many Afghans and foreign visa holders are waiting outside Kabul International Airport to flee the Taliban takeover of Afghanistan, despite a suicide bombing attack and gunmen targeting the crowds. People are waiting there and flocking to the airport as well. The total number of casualties is in the hundreds, with the dead including a dozen US Marines and a Navy medic, according to US officials.
We know that 12 U.S. service members have been killed in the attack, and 15 more service members have been injured. A number of Afghan civilians were also killed and injured in the attack. We are treating some of them aboard HKIA. Many other Afghan civilians have been taken out to hospitals in town. We're still working to calculate the total losses. We just don't know it. Let me be clear. While we're saddened by the loss of life, both U.S. and Afghan, we're continuing to execute the mission. Our mission is to evacuate U.S. citizens, third country nationals, special immigrant visa holders, U.S. Embassy staff, and Afghans at risk.
Some key Republican lawmakers are now calling for US President Joe Biden to resign over how he's handled the troop withdrawal from Afghanistan and the Taliban takeover. Prime Minister Scott Morrison said in a statement that he's, quote, deeply saddened by the deaths of US military personnel and Afghans in the horrific terrorist attacks in Kabul. We mourn your tragic loss. Australia condemns these barbaric attacks. Despite all this, the US says they will continue evacuations until the very last moment. The BBC reports new safety measures have been implemented in conjunction with the Taliban to improve safety at Kabul airport. The White House says well over 100,000 people have been evacuated since the airlift began a fortnight ago, but the Pentagon claims there are still credible threats about more attacks at the airport. Back home, new changes to federal election rules have passed through the parliament with the support of the opposition. Minor parties will now be forced to find 1,500 members before they can register with the Electoral Commission, up from the previous 500. But arguably the most significant change is surrounding party names, with newer parties now not able to have names too similar to existing ones. One of those parties that's been forced to change their name only slightly is the New Liberals. The party's founder, Victor Kline, joins us live now. Victor, thanks very much for joining us tonight. Just explain for viewers who may be unaware what's happened with this bill and what is your new party name?
So the bill was designed to overcome the fact that the Liberal Party failed to get us deregistered for using the word Liberal in our name, because the AEC said that people wouldn't be confused, and they quoted several federal court judges who said that the Liberal Party can't just take a word like Liberal, a generic political word like Liberal, box it up and exercise property rights over it or have a monopoly. So they introduced legislation to overcome that. There were two parts of the legislation. The first part was requiring parties to now have 1,500 members at least instead of 500 members. Now that was going to impact on about 40 small parties. People need to understand not many people join political parties in this country. Even the Liberal Party only has 15,000 members. So for a small party to get from 500 to 1,500, and they were only given 3 months, was tantamount to them just being struck off the electoral rolls. The other part of the bill was more directed specifically at us and said that if a party has, and designed to overcome the litigation that we had won against them, saying that if you even have one word or part of that word in your name that corresponds to an earlier party, they can have you deregistered. So because they have Liberal in their name, we have Liberals in our name, they could get us deregistered. Now, that went through the Senate, went through the House of Representatives and the Senate in under 24 hours with the support of the Labor Party. So that we were required to change our name, which we have done to TNL, but that requirement is only for the ballot paper in the ballot box. So we are entitled to be called the New Liberals legally in every other circumstance.
Look, in 2013, Liberal Democrats candidate David Leinhelm was elected to the Senate. He said that a portion of the party's vote came from being in the first position on the Senate ballot paper and voters potentially thinking they were voting for the Liberals. How do you respond to claims your party's name is misleading?
First of all, I've never heard that Leinhelm admitted to that. My understanding is that he didn't. He may be right and I may be wrong, I don't know. But my understanding is that that was the assessment of other people of how Leinhelm got elected. And I think that assessment makes a big assumption. It assumes that people voted for him by mistake rather than voting for him by choice. And there's no way of knowing that or proving that. And the AEC and the federal court on several occasions with Liberals of the Forest and the Liberal Democrats and now ourselves have said that the voting public are not that stupid. They're not going to make that sort of mistake.
Look, just on that, he did admit to it. There is an ABC article where he says, in part, quote, "There are some people who mistook us for the Liberals, but they could have also mistaken us for the Christian Democrats or even the ordinary Democrats." So there you go. Now, in May, you announced Les Stock as your candidate for Warringah in Sydney. However, he's no longer running and is heavily criticising your party on social media. What happened?
Well, Les was an interesting case. Les was someone who presented, I met Les also on Twitter. He presented as quite a conservative personality on Twitter. We had a number of interchanges about policy and so on. And then I was very much surprised when he put his hand up to stand for Warringah. And I thought that probably wasn't going to work. Nonetheless, you want to give people a chance. So we met and we discussed things. And Les said to me that, he reflected on things and that he indeed really loved our policies and he'd be very happy to promote them. And he understood that when it came to forming policy, he would be entitled to vigorously argue against a point if he wanted. And of course, I agreed with that. But that once the policy had been made, that he would be someone that would support it to the hilt like every other member of the party. So we talked about it in the National Executive and we took him on board, and he'd only been on board for a little while when he started vigorously criticising our policies on Twitter. We gave him several opportunities. We said, "Les, you've got to stop this." And he said, "Oh, yeah, sorry, a mistake, whatever." And eventually he didn't stop and we just had to let him go.
Well, what about Kirsty Miller? She was also announced as a candidate, but has now said, quote, "When I joined the New Liberals," she's talking about there, "I was sold a Kirby vacuum, but ended up with a raggedy old broom." How do you respond to her?
What did she say?
She said, "When I joined, I was sold a Kirby vacuum, but ended up with a raggedy old broom." How do you respond to her further claim that this party's all about you getting into the Senate?
Well, it's just nonsense. There's no basis for that whatsoever. Kirsty's an interesting character. She's a transgender woman who put her hand up to run in the outer western seat of Parkes in New South Wales. which we thought was a terrific idea. Put a transgender woman against a redneck Nationals candidate out there. And Kirsty came on board, and she was a vigorous and active candidate, member of the party, and I suppose the high point shortly before she left was to say, I'm a transgender woman. I've suffered a lot of persecution in my life, but I've never been so happy and I've never felt so loved and accepted as I am in this party. And then shortly after that, she sent a short note saying, I resign and I can't tell you why, and blocked us all.
Well, moving away from past candidates, in mid-June you tweeted that in 2028 the House of Representatives would include your party having 80 seats, the Greens having 60 and the Conservative Labor Party, made up of the LNP and the ALP, having 6. Is that really realistic? Not just the goal for your party, but the Greens, let alone having 60. Do you stand by that tweet?
Yeah, look, it was a bit of a stir. And those numbers were, plucked out of the ether by me, obviously. So it was partly tongue-in-cheek. But I think the general principle is true. So what you've got now is two parties who are doing nothing, offering nothing, saying nothing, driving the country into the ground, and now behaving like a one-party totalitarian state. They've already lost over 30% of the primary voters going elsewhere. In Melbourne in 2019, yes, Adam Bant won. But the Greens came close in, I think, 5 other seats, and I mean really close, within a hair's breadth of taking that from Labor. I think next election alone in 2022, there'll be probably 6 Melbourne Greens in the lower house. I think Brisbane, the seat of Brisbane will go to the Greens, and maybe another seat in Sydney. So already you would have the Greens with 8 lower house seats. I think what the psephologists are telling us now is that we've got the possibility of taking 20% of the Liberal votes in about 3 dozen Liberal-held seats.
All right, just finally, there are rumours floating around of a federal election as soon as this year, potentially October or November. Will you continue your plan not to run in any Labor-held seats after what's happened with this bill?
Yes. We want the people to know that if we give our word, we keep our word. It's too important when there's such chicanery and criminal behaviour going on in the duopoly. We need to be able to show the people that we keep to our promises. So we have promised not to run against Labor. And despite their despicable conduct, both to us and the 30 or 40 minor parties and to the essence of our democratic system, we feel that we still need to keep our word. Now it's getting really difficult because we're getting hundreds and hundreds of, well, thousands and thousands actually now of Labor people coming across to us, joining the party, sending us emails, sending us messages saying, I'll never vote for Labor again, please stand in a Labor seat.
All right, we'll leave it there. Victor Kline, founder of the New Liberals, thanks very much for joining us tonight.
Thank you very much. Great pleasure as always.
All right, now in a statement to 6 News, Kirsty Miller said in part that she resigned for several reasons, some personal and others to do with the party, while Les Stock also said similar and denied all claims. All right, now is Ivan and Sarah with a look what's coming up later tonight on WAMN News.
Thanks, Leo. Tonight on WAMN News, shabby and unacceptable claims emerge of poor cultural practice impacting staff at St John of God's Subiaco Hospital.
Premier Mark McGowan urged to increase funding in regional crime prevention as the Liberal opposition backs a youth curfew.
12 to 16-year-old children recommended to get their jabs, plus Dr Andrew Miller's comment.
Join us tonight on the WAMN News Facebook page and YouTube channel.
All right, thanks both Ivan and Sarah there. And Adam Morris forecast right across the country. Brisbane, partly cloudy, a top of 28, 17 in Sydney, 15 degrees in the nation's capital Canberra, 17 in Melbourne, 16 in heavy clouds in Hobart, 19 in Adelaide, sunny and 29 in Alice Springs, 18 in Perth, and in Darwin, a warm top of 33. And finally tonight, it was Book Week this week, where students across Australia, mainly in primary schools, dressed up as their favourite character from a text. Now, obviously it was a bit harder this year for students in New South Wales, Victoria and the ACT, but we still had students dress up for Zoom meetings. We also had some older people do it too. Take a look at this. This was the Governor-General, David Hurley, and his wife, Linda Hurley, reading to students over Zoom. Her Excellency also even got dressed up for the occasion with a pretty good Cat in the Hat costume, gloves and all, as part of the festivities. And that is 6 News for this Sunday evening. You can stay up to date with the latest headlines by heading to our website 6newsau.com and by following us on social media, Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, TikTok and Lit. Just search 6 News AU to find us. I'm Leonardo Puglisi. Thanks for your company. Good night.